Hello, welcome back to our channel. It's Taylor and Sasha. Today's video is on CBD. It's a PSA because there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding CBD, so I just wanted to contribute to clearing some of those up. And it's lengthy, so we're just gonna get straight to it. I just want to address the previous video since I got some questions. It's not the final product. What I made in the previous video is not the final product. It was just a tester. But anyway, for today's video, the topics we will cover are THC versus CBD, marijuana versus hemp, CBD purity, the science of CBD, anecdotal evidence of CBD's efficacy, and the legality of CBD. And today's question is, what CBD products have you used before? And if you haven't used any, please let me know why in the comments below. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. So first, we'll start with the difference between CBD and THC. Of course, THC is the one that probably carries the negative connotation or the drug-related connotation. THC is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and it's the main psychoactive component in cannabis sativa. And so when inhaled via smoke, THC travels to the brain and binds to receptors responsible for your thinking, memory, pleasure, etc. So that is what causes the hallucinations and the sensation of being high. But on the other hand, you have CBD. So THC and CBD are both cannabinoids, which are just these compounds found in cannabis sativa that interact with your endogenous cannabinoid system in the body. CBD is basically an analog of THC. So they have similar structures, but different functions. So here you have THC, and here you have CBD. And so the main difference is that CBD has two alcohols, which is why it's cannabidiol, and THC instead has one ester and an alcohol. And so that slight difference in molecular structure does change its function. CBD does not have the same psychoactive activity as THC. CBD is used as an anti-inflammatory, and it has the ability to calm and soothe different things in the body, and is associated with a general feeling of well-being. The mechanisms are not known completely for how CBD performs its function, but what's important to note is that these two components of the same plant are different molecules and do different things in the body. Okay, this next part of the video is on marijuana versus hemp. So again, you are talking about the same plant, cannabis sativa. The cannabinoids are these pharmaceutically relevant compounds inside cannabis sativa, but depending on how the plant is managed and what the environment is like when it's being cultivated, the ratios of these cannabinoids in relation to each other may change. So marijuana is a version of cannabis that has more THC than CBD, and then hemp is a version of cannabis that has more CBD than THC. And so this is an important distinction that's really only just now being recognized, because before, since people didn't recognize this difference or didn't know, hemp was also kind of looked at sideways, like, oh, is that a drug? Like, that's like weed, right? But it's not, it's different. And so again, it's the same family, but there's different things going on here. All right, the next part is CBD purity. So you have marijuana-derived CBD, you have hemp-derived CBD, but ultimately what you need to understand is that there are so many different cannabinoids, as we already discussed, but also other molecules in a general hemp seed oil, hemp extract, sativa seed oil extract. it's mixed in with a lot of different things. But a CBD isolate is honing in on the CBD itself and attempting to get it in its purest form. And so a CBD isolate will always come with a certificate of analysis or a certificate of quality showing you the relative levels of impurities in the isolate. And so the main one of note will be the THC, but then there are other things like microbials, pesticides, and things like that. So the company that you get it from should be able to prove its quality and its safety. So the CBD that I use in my product is, I'm looking at the C of A for it right now, and the limit of quantitation that they use for a lot of the other cannabinoids is 0.01%. So the THC is confirmed to be lower than 0.01% of this CBD isolate, and it confirms that the CBD is the cannabinoid that is at the forefront of this isolate. And so that's important because you want to make sure, the CBD you are either using in your own products or the CBD that you are yourself consuming is of quality and is actually an isolate. It is possible for products to say that they have CBD in them when they actually have a hemp extract or sativa extract. And that's not always a bad thing, because one article that I read suggested that the hemp seed extract might actually be better for CBD's ability to penetrate deeper levels of the skin and get to a point in the body where it can actually alleviate arthritis pain. Because it has all those other lipids in it, it helps the absorption of the CBD be increased so that it can actually be effective in the body. So depending on what the product is, the hemp seed oil might be more relevant than a CBD isolate. But for the case of my product, which is meant to act at the skin level and target an external ailment, the CBD absorption past the skin isn't exactly necessary, but CBD action at the skin is what we're going for to have that anti-inflammatory effect. So depending on what the product is, a hemp extract, a sativa extract versus a CBD isolate, it depends on what you're going for to determine which one is more effective. But when you want to make sure that the CBD isolate is actually pure, you want to look at the C of A or C of Q. Okay, next we get into the science of CBD. So in the case of topicals for things like arthritis pain, as I mentioned before, there generally needs to be a very high concentration of CBD to have an effect on the pain. But it's still a little bit muddy because there's not enough data to know just yet at what point is there saturation. At what point do you have too much or an extraneous amount of CBD in a product to the point where at one level it was working and then this extra amount of CBD isn't really doing anything for you. So there's still information that needs to be deduced. But for CBD to be an anti-inflammatory that acts at the skin level, so instead of having to penetrate through the skin and act at inflammation in your joints or whatever, you're just dealing with inflammation at the skin level. So there isn't really a need for concentrations that are as high as something that would treat arthritis, for example. So, but at the same time that people speculate about certain concentrations of CBD potentially being at a point of saturation or past a point of saturation, there are also articles that show you really do need a lot of CBD in a topical product for it to get through and actually perform its function. So again, you're dealing with a lack of information, but what you can go off of is what's out there on the market and what tends to work. But back to the science. The molecules in the body that CBD bind are cannabinoid receptor type 1 and cannabinoid receptor type 2. And so these receptors can be found in epidermal keratinocytes, cutaneous nerve fibers, dermal cells, melanocytes, oil glands, and hair follicles. The CBD going into the sebaceous gland is possible because it has high lipophilicity, meaning it's a lipid and it likes interacting with other lipids. It's expected to enter the skin via the transfollicular route and accumulate in the sebaceous gland. And so since you have those cannabinoid receptors in the sebaceous gland, and then you have the CBD arriving there, that is where you have activity that downstream leads to the anti-inflammatory effects of CBD. So basically what's happening when CBD binds these receptors is that it's able to downregulate expression of inflammation-related genes and upregulate expression of anti-inflammatory factors. So what's important to note here is that not all inflammation is bad. Inflammation is a necessary part of the process of being injured and the injury beginning to heal itself. But when it becomes dysfunctional, it can prolong the wound healing process, and it can even lead to skin thickening. So instead of things healing and becoming smooth and going back to normal, it can cause sort of an overproliferation of skin cells and can make it more like callus when it doesn't need to be. And so it does that thickening through the activation of keratinocytes. And so activation and proliferation of keratinocytes is also a normal part of wound healing and skin repair. However, when this process becomes dysfunctional and the keratinocytes are not properly downregulated, once the body says, okay, this injury is over and done with, we can wrap it up. If they're not downregulated, then it can cause overproliferation of those cells and cause thickening at that site of injury. So basically where the CBD comes into play here is that it acts as a modulator of inflammation to ensure that the parts of the process that are supposed to happen transition smoothly one after the other and act properly instead of sort of going out of whack and, you know, causing a whole new problem because they were becoming dysfunctional. Interestingly enough, CBD can actually inhibit oil production at the oil glands when it interacts with a certain ion channel. And so it sounds counterintuitive because you would actually, in cases of dry skin, you would actually want the oil glands to be functional, right? But stay with me because there's a lot going on here. When it interacts with this ion channel, is basically creating a different signaling pathway, and that signaling pathway leads to suppression of oil secretion. So you have less oil. So there's basically a two-pronged effect here, and it depends on the presence of the molecules that the CBD can bind with. It's a transient ion channel, so it's not always in the same place. And so also what's notable about the studies related to the oil glands is that these studies were done with cells in culture. So a test of dealing with CBD and cells in culture versus taking a cream or mixture with CBD in it and applying it to a real person's skin and looking at what's going on, it still can be relevant. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but there's more information that needs to be filled in to connect those two scenarios. So to what extent is there anti-inflammatory action of CBD compared to the extent to which there is this lipid production inhibition from CBD? There's not enough information to know yet. But what we do know is that from CBD moisturizers and CBD skin products that are already on the market, we know that CBD in skincare is used to reduce inflammation. So in cases of eczema, in cases of flakiness and all of that, the CBD in the product delivers. And so moisturization is likely coming from the other ingredients in the product, whereas the CBD's ability to decrease inflammation gives all of those cells in your skin the chance to do what they need to do. Because one article I read suggested that underproduction of sebaceous glands has some inflammatory reasoning to it. So by calming down inflammation, the sebaceous gland activity can actually be restored and would be producing the normal amount of oil that you would expect. That's one possibility. But in general, when you have CBD in a cream with other moisturizers, you have the shea butter, the coconut oil, whatever, that is introducing the lipids, and you have the ceramides that reinforce the skin barrier, or the hyaluronic acid that reinforces the skin barrier and traps in moisture. And on top of that, you have the anti-inflammatory impact of the CBD. So all of these different things working in conjunction together make sure that you have the anti-inflammation, which is important, but you also are still allowing for the skin to be moisturized. So in this case, where you have CBD in a moisturizing cream or a moisturizing mask, whatever, the effect of CBD enhances the intended effect of the product instead of working against it. Okay, now we get into the benefits of CBD. It's largely anecdotal. I can tell you my particular experience with CBD. So Sasha is a very old dog, but she also sustained an injury years ago where she injured her spine. And at the time, she lost her ability to walk, but then when her spine healed, she regained her ability to walk, but not without lasting effects. So she still has continued nerve damage and nerve pain as a result of that damage, and sometimes it makes it hard for her to walk. And her leg, one of her hind legs, just kind of sticks out straight and stays stiff because of that nerve pain. But when we administer CBD, we use pet grade CBD for her, and it's 250 milligrams. And so we administer her CBD orally, or we put it in her food, and you see a reduction in that stiffening in her leg. She's able to walk on it instead of just like kind of limping without it, you know? And so it's a notable effect in her overall well-being and her mobility. So CBD for Sasha has been effective for a long time. And my own experience taking CBD, so I've also had issues with nerve pain just because of like slouching or like text neck, looking down at the phone, things like that. There's this area in the back of my neck that would sometimes pop, and after it pops, it would just have like this burning, searing pain right in here, or it would like shoot into my shoulder, and nothing would get rid of it. I would take Tylenol, the Tylenol wouldn't really help. I would take Aleve, the Aleve wouldn't really help. In fact, one time I took too much Aleve because I had this burning pain in my back for like a whole week, and I couldn't take it anymore. And I was, you know, at the end of the week, I still wasn't done yet. I couldn't just sit down and go to sleep. I still had errands to run, all this stuff. So I was taking medicine hoping the pain would go away. And I took Aleve multiple times throughout that day. I took 6 pills because I thought I confused the daily maximum of Aleve with the daily maximum of Tylenol. Tylenol you can take up to 6. Aleve you're only supposed to take up to 3. And that's because Aleve is an NSAID. And so basically, by the time my back pain went away, stomach pain set in shortly after, and I was really going through it. So the normal medication out there isn't really going to do a good job of addressing nerve pain. But when I take CBD oil capsules that type of nerve pain, it doesn't go away completely, but it's diminished to a point where it's not like I'm constantly like hurting, you know. It'll still hurt, but it won't be to the point where it's so exhausting, because dealing with chronic pain or going the entire day dealing with severe pain, you know, it's just exhausting. It takes a lot out of you. And even forget about the nerve pain, just a little bit less extreme. I have some arthritis pain sometimes in my shoulder, but mainly in my left knee, and that's just because some joint problems run in the family. But I once took those CBD oil capsules at 8 a.m. in the morning and did not have any pain again in my knee until 4 p.m. that day, which was great because I was working on a job where I was constantly on my feet. And so I didn't even notice it had worked so well until 4 o'clock comes around and I feel this pain in my knee. I'm like, dang, what happened to my knee? And I realized, oh, it's usually like that. I just didn't have that problem today. So the CBD capsules were very effective for reducing inflammation and easing that terrible, terrible pain. And no side effects. Like, I didn't have burning in my stomach. I didn't almost give myself an ulcer. Like, it lasted a long time and it actually did the job. And so no being woozy, no psychotropic effects, none of that. It just targets the inflammation and does your body justice. It does the service that you desperately needed in that moment. So I'm telling you, from my own experience, CBD can do a lot of good. Okay, and finally, we will talk about the legality of CBD. So we've already covered what makes hemp and marijuana different and what CBD actually is. And that's important because federal law states that hemp-derived CBD is legal. And the legal definition of hemp requires that it has less than 0.3% THC in it. So those are your two requirements. And that was set by the Agricultural Improvement Act, or the Farm Bill of 2018. So 1, the CBD needs to come from hemp, and 2, the hemp should have less than 0.3% THC. And in the state of Maryland, where I am, there are no additional laws on top of that regarding, CBD creams and CBD topicals. However, there is mention that the sale of food containing CBD or THC is illegal based on the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. So that's illegal in Maryland. But as for CBD meant for the medicinal purpose, that's readily sold in stores. You don't need any special prescription. You don't need any special credentials to obtain it. If it's in the store and you know it's a quality source, you are free to get it. It's legal. So that's in the state of Maryland. Other states may have different laws, but again, remember, federal law says it's also legal. And so what's important here is just understanding, what these words really mean and what these compounds are really doing in the body. More and more CBD is on the rise. In the case of purely medical, treating ailments, coming up with new pharmaceuticals, or also in the cosmetic industry. There's so many different things that people are using CBD for, because the door is open for possibilities since we're just now really learning about it, researching it, and testing it out. So if you were once concerned about CBD, you kind of side-eyed it a little bit because you're like, isn't that a drug? Isn't that weed? Blah, blah, blah. I hope this information has been helpful to help you understand what CBD actually is, what it actually does, and how it can help you, or how it can help your furry friends when you buy my pet skincare line. So all of the links for all the articles and information that I presented to you will be in the comment section below. Please do not forget to answer the question, have you tried any CBD products before? And if not, why not? What reservations do you have? I could do some more research and answer more questions for you. happy to do so because clearly I had a good time putting this together. But that's just the bio nerd in me. Otherwise, thank you very much for tuning in, and I can't wait to see you next week for our next video.